Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the ICRP TG108 Digital Workshop Part 2. This is the second part of our workshops on the topic of optimization of radiological protection in digital radiology. The document that we're going to talk about today is currently out for consultation, and I recommend that you see the ICRP website for details. The consultation doesn't close until the end of the month, so you've actually still got time to give us your thoughts. Still got time to give us your thoughts, and thanks to all of those who've already submitted some comments. It's good to see comments coming in already. Just some background for you, we've produced two reports that describe aspects of optimization that different facilities might achieve and through which they can progress incrementally. The first report's already been the subject of a workshop which was held in October 2022. I'd like to thank all of you who attended that workshop, and thanks so much for the very many helpful comments that we received on the consultation document. This new workshop sets out the areas that are dealt with in the second report. The report, if you haven't seen it, I hope you have, is concerned with practical aspects of optimization for digital X-ray imaging, including radiography, fluoroscopy, and computer tomography, and it builds on the structures for optimization. It's delivered in the first part. Here's the program for today. After my brief introduction, Colin, who's from Glasgow, is going to give us an overview of the TG108 approach to optimization. Joanna, who's not an author, has agreed to step in and give an overview of the radiography chapter. Jenia from IAEA is going to talk about fluoroscopy. Mika is going to give us a talk about new technologies for optimization in MDCT. Irene is going to talk about MDCT in clinical practice. Kimberly is unable to present today, but her talk on the considerations for pediatric patients will be summarized by Colin. John Damalakis is going to give us his thoughts on imaging pregnant patients. After all of that, we're going to have a Q&A session, which will last for about 20 minutes. Hopefully we can answer all of the questions that you ask. If we don't manage to answer them, then we'll put out a summary later of answers to questions. Following the Q&A, Kwan is going to give an introductory talk on global optimization strategies and then introduce what should be a very interesting panel discussion on that topic. And hopefully we'll be finished at 3 o'clock. So just some facts and Q&As for you. Please submit your questions in the Q&A area, and we'll try and answer them at the Q&A session. First fact, attendees will receive a certificate of attendance. The second fact, because people always ask this, the webinar will be available on the ICRP website in due course. So that's my reintroduction over, and I'd like to ask Colin to give us the first talk of the afternoon in the UK.
I'm going to try and say something about our approach to optimization. As David says, we've produced two reports. In the first of those, we tried to set out the general approach, and we're going to give more details of the individual modalities in the second report. So really, optimization of clinical images, the images should be sufficient to ensure that accurate and reliable diagnosis is made so that the correct clinical decisions can be taken. The radiation doses used for the images should be adjusted to the minimum level required to provide an adequate image. So what we ask is, how do we make this happen? We often see things starting to do, but we need a consistent process to drive this through the department. The data is needed from the clinical image requirements, the performance, and the patient dose surveys to optimize protocols. So we have set out this sort of arrangement where there's different aspects. There's the processes which trigger what happens. There's the methodology and the expertise to carry out assessments. And then there's a general professionalism of individual professions acting together. Now, I did a survey, or carried out a survey, 10 years or so ago, looking at who was involved in the performance tests, patient dose surveys, things like that. And what we found out was in Western Europe and Australia, which was what I was used to, the medical physicists had quite a fair involvement, and it was a hospital medical physicist. But in the USA, parts of Eastern Europe, New Zealand, Latin America, there were private medical physicists who did the tests on the equipment. In Eastern Europe, it could be university staff involved in the patient dose surveys. And in Africa and Asia, it was government personnel who often carried out the performance tests. So it's quite difficult when you have these different groupings to make sure that the information from those tests feeds into the development of protocols. So so each profession, radiologists, radiographers, and medical physicists possess the particular skills, and the optimization requires a collaboration relating to that. And if a medical physicist just comes in to do some tests and then they don't are involved with the other groups, then this isn't going to happen, or it's much more difficult for it to happen. And what we realized is, as we did reviews in different parts of the world, the degree to which an organization has implemented optimization will depend on the equipment, the facilities, the funding, the personnel, the level of knowledge of expertise and experience available, and the collaboration between the groups that have these different groups. So I want to look briefly at or I want to say something about the different levels. We put in a preliminary level with little or no diagnostic radiology medical physics support, performance tests carried out just to meet regulatory requirements, a limited organizational structure or documentation of procedures, and the evaluation of clinical images really just based on the radiologist's assessment of the image quality. What we regard as the basic level was the imaging professionals appointed include medical physicists, but the arrangements for performance testing and patient dose surveys, they may be ad hoc, and you get limited feedback to the other professionals involved, and also the limited documentation of the procedures. So moving up from there, we see optimization teams comprising radiographers, radiologists, and medical physicists being set up. And at this level, the DRLs beginning to be established for some modalities, and surveys of patient doses for major examinations feeding into evidence-based preparation of protocols. And then at the advanced level, we see levels of image quality for specific clinical tasks agreed between all the reviewers. So it's all the radiologists, all the clinicians involved agreeing on the level of image quality required, and continual live review and optimization of imaging protocols. So we've got analysis and use of dose management software or something similar to that. So the whole optimization process is continues all the time. And so with the methodology section, which really a lot of this second report is based on, is improving measurement tools, developing expertise and interpreting results, the application of evidence in the preparation and review of protocols for each of the different modalities. And to that end, we've included in boxes in the different chapters the arrangements that should be in place, facilities at different levels of optimization. So this is just an example from the radiography section. And then the processes have documented arrangements for equipment testing and dose audit, and established links for improving protocols and monitoring optimization. So triggers are given for when different actions are taken, and they all feed through to the optimization of protocols. I want to say just something about the different reports that we already have. We've got the medical group within ICRP produces reports quite regularly over the last 20 years. We've produced quite a lot, but lots of things have changed in that time. So the radiography one, which was produced in 2004, that was for digital radiography. That is largely going to be replaced by the current report, but most of the fluoroscopy ones, there'll be elements within these that continue or should continue as reference. In the computed tomography ones, by and large, our new report should replace those two. The pediatric radiology one, there's still a lot of information in there which is of relevance. And we have other reports on education, training, diagnostic reference levels, and occupational exposure in interventional work. So all these other reports will still be available, and most of them will still be relevant. Just a few of them will be replaced by this present report. So the requirements for optimization need a team of multi-professional skills, and we've really tried to bring that out, as I say, because we're aware of these different groups that feed into the process, and unless we emphasize that, we feel that they won't be working together. So we need to really concentrate on that. And there's the evaluation of equipment performance, utilizing parameters that are relevant to clinical use. There's the ongoing monitoring, review, and analysis of performance to ensure that tasks, including patient dose surveys, are carried out, and results of monitoring are used in improving optimization. So at that point, I'd like to thank the other members of the task group, and thank you for your attention, and I'll hand back to Dave.
Thank you, Colin. Could you stop sharing your screen? Thank you very much. Thanks very much for that interesting overview. I'd like to now hand over to Joanna Santos, who is going to talk to us about the radiography chapter in the document, and also give us some information on optimization from the clinic.
Thank you for the kind introduction. So I will go through this presentation, going to the summary that was presented, that was developed from Dean Pekarovich, that I'm presenting here on the session. So I'll try to perform a brief summary about the differences that we have on our digital radiography systems in our days. So we came from the screen film, and we have at that moment the real knowledge in terms of image quality in those, because we select the correct exposure parameters according to the patients to obtain the most correct imaging. But then we moved to digital, and with this we started with the computed radiology, and more recently the digital radiology systems, and we obtain our dynamic images that are digital, then have a dynamic range, and the appearance of our images could be very similar with different dose exposures for the same examination. So what happened was that we increased a lot the detect on quantum efficiency of our systems. However, sometimes we don't use it if we don't optimize the system. So it's very important to get use of the digital technologies and be aware of the equipment technologies. So if you look for a CR system with a computed radiology system, we have a image plate-based system. We have some process for reading based on lasers, and for cleaning based on the white light. And this process also involves the digitalization of the system. So it's have a little bit of less image resolution when you compare to the digital radiology systems. They could be direct or indirect. Even on this, you could have different types of detectors. In the case that you have an indirect detector, the most used are from the cesium, and you could have this type of detectors that give you a good relations in terms of if you compare with the CR system. However, in this system, you have a conversion of the X-ray to light, and you have a dispersion, and the point spread function that you have in this system, it's a little bit large when you compare it to the, for example, the selenium systems that have a point spread function that is linear. So depending on the energy that you are using to perform the X-ray examinations, you could have better resolution when with the indirect or with the direct system. So it's important to be aware of kind of system that you use before you started the optimization of the exposure parameters. So the first exposure parameter that I want to talk is the basic. When you think that you need to put your tube working, you need to focus on the tube voltage and to current structures. So it's important to be aware, depending on the body region that you are performing examinations, you could start thinking that for mammography, we need less tube voltage. We increase it for extremities. Normally, we started at 45 until 70, for example. Then for trunk examinations, like abdominal, we have a higher range of values. You increase them for larger patients. And for chest radiograph, you increase the values around 125 kVs to obtain a good image. But we can't forget that we are using a Potter-Wacky system. We included the grid here, and the better relation that we could have for the grids are 12:1. But there are some tips and tricks about the grids. We use the grids for decrease the scattered radiation in our images. And however, if you don't use it properly, it could not work. For example, in terms of source to distance images, our grids are prepared to work properly for the specific distances that your equipment provided you. And in some examinations, if you don't have the image receptor according to the grid positioning, you could have an aliasing imaging that is not good, and you have poor image quality. Other aspect about the grid are the examinations that are performed on pediatric or to body regions that have less than 12 AP centimeters of diameter. So it's relevant to think in all these topics. And for example, these centering problems that are presented here are the ones that more occur with portable systems. But in our days, grids appears in a different format. We have some new softwares about virtual grid. So I present here an example to don't use the grid, have a real grid, and in the middle using a virtual grid. If you don't use the grid, you already know that you are going to lose on quality. If you use a real grid, you know that you have a little bit more dose for the examination. However, some virtual softwares that present the grid, we don't know specifically if you have the same image quality approach. So it's better to adapt what are the specific conditions that you should use the grid to perform the most correct examinations. If you compare what happened with this kind of softwares, you're going to see, for example, that you are manipulating the histogram of our images. You can see here the differences of the levels of gray that are represented in your image when you use this kind of softwares. So if you think on all these aspects, it's important to be aware what kind of exposure that you have selected. So if you are using automatic exposure control, you should use the ionization cameras properly. Like if you are performing, for example, a pelvic radiograph, you use the lateral chambers or the central for spine and for shoulders, or all the cameras for abdominal, or in some equipments, you could not use the ionization chambers if you are not using a Potter-Wacky system. In this case, for example, if you could not remove the grid, it's better to do it outside of the Potter. However, it's relevant to compare adults and pediatric patients, because the same selection for adults cannot be useful for a pediatric patient if you think on the patient size. So if you think on the chest radiography, you see for adults you could select lateral, but for pediatric patients, you're going to move for the central ionization chamber, considering the patient size. So it's relevant that you be aware of ionization chambers are calibrated according to your systems for CRs and for DRs systems, but also it's very relevant that the radiographers perform the radiographs according to the proper patient positioning. There are some clinical situations that is better to not use it, but on the majority of the procedures, it's better to use it because it decreases the patient exposure. Another aspect that is very relevant is the additional of metal filters. You have, if you don't use it, you have a lot of photons that going to stay on the patient and don't contribute to the image quality because they don't go through the image receptor. So it's better to apply a filter. Additional filtration could help us. The most known is about using the copper filtration, and you obtain a better image quality, and you decrease the examination dose, as for example, the cap values. However, it's important to be aware, if you are using the filter, you should increase the control noise by using the manipulation of the tube current time product to obtain the same image quality that you are expecting. So if you increase at 0.1 or a 0.2, you need to be aware of the control noise that you need to adapt. And it's also relevant to be aware that your tube lifetime could be a little bit different. So you have on a report an example of the images performed in a cadaver with the different types of cap values that you could see when you increase the filter that you are using. However, it's also relevant to be aware where did you have your DAP meter, because if you have the filter after the DAP meter, you don't see it on the dose values, you just see it on the image qualities. So if you go for the distances, this is another very important exposure perimeter. We have the specific distances for each examination because you don't want a magnification of your exams. We use the inverse low square log that is very important, for example, for staff radiation protection measures. However, here, if you don't use it as a fixed, if you don't maintain the value that are established for your equipment, you could vary this. So the recommendations are that you use 110 centimeters around that in order to decrease the entrance skin hair camera values. And if you change the distance and at the same time you change the focal spot, you will increase a lot the penumbra area. This penumbra area will expose the more tissues, will increase the cap values, and you also have the situation to obtain less image quality. So it's relevant to select the small focus for small structures, only use the large focus to, for example, an abdominal examination. However, be aware of the penumbra effect that you have in your images. All these parameters in terms of field of view also vary with the distance, but are influenced also by the collimation. The collimation is the way that we have to limit the X-ray for the specific body region. However, in our systems with the electronic devices, we have different types of collimation, but the real collimation based on the collimators that you have around our cube are the ones that decrease the exposure values. The electronic collimation don't guarantee that you decrease the exposure values of your examination. It only helps to have beautiful images in your packs, but the exposure of your patients had increased because you have used all the collimators open instead of collimated to the anatomic region of interest. So you have a table 2.1 with different exposure parameters for different body parts. Don't forget to adapt this to the detector type, to the anatomic region, and according to the patient size and the clinical questions. In terms of digital systems, also revealed us a new tool that you could use. You have exposure indicators considering your detector. They are not examination dose values because they are established according to the values that you obtain on your detector. There are exposure index. These exposure index are related. One of them, it's the target exposure index that is related to the body region and for the clinical tasks that you could define if you want in your optimization process. And you could analyze the deviation of these values. You could find these values on the DICOM headers, and you analyze the relation between the air camera and the value that you obtain and the optimal range for each procedure. So we could compare the examination dose values with this example of exposure index, and you have more or less the mean values to compare both of them and establish what are the values that you want for the optimization process. So in terms of patient shielding. We have recent literature showing that, and you have here on the report also the recommendation to avoid the use is not recommended, especially for the situations that you have the shielding in plane that could increase the values of the cap in our exams. So in the majority of the situations, the use of shielding is not recommended, as you can see on the table 2.3. So I have presented here all the factors of optimization separately. We have a very, very useful table in this document that present what happened for each factor and what happened on the dose or the effects on the dose, and also the influence on image quality and information as a summary. Other aspects that you have on this table are related to the analysis of the retakes. We are not so used to analyze what are the causes, but the retakes analysis is very relevant, especially on the PACS. You could figure out what happened, what are the main causes, and try to optimize the procedures to avoid these retakes. Other aspect that is mentioned on this report are the use of workstations that have post-processing tools to help radiographers to promote more image quality assessment and try to figure out the causes that have more impact on examinations. For example, image processing could be used on the daily practice to avoid repeats or retakes. If you look for this example, with image processing, you could see on image B and C the same examination dose on these two images, and with image processing you increase the details that you need for diagnostics. So image processing tools are very useful. You could apply directly to the histogram and manipulate the histogram of our images. We could move the curve of contrast in our images, but we could also apply some specific filters that you have on the workstations in order to improve the image quality and obtain more image quality on the images to diagnostic information, to receive more diagnostic information. So it's important to be aware of all the steps of optimization on the workflow. During all the workflow, it's possible to think and optimize the procedure. For example, before we start the examination, we need to check the patient name. We need to also check all the information about patient's risks and benefits were present to the patient. And also during the procedure, all the exposure parameters that I presented before may be adjusted. But for example, brief instructions will help you to avoid the retakes of the images. If you explain correctly and properly, you could optimize all the exposure parameters, the positioning, and all the reading instructions. And immediately after you perform your examination, you could also analyze the image quality, prepare the images, analyze the dose, and compare them with the exposure indicator of the system, and then complete the examination, prepare the images to go to the PACS, and analyze all these steps to all the parts of the workflow of the examinations. But be aware that for perform optimization, it's very important to guarantee that you have your quality assurance provided. So a small example is, for example, analyze the detectors. You could have softwares that are specific for that, or in case you don't have it, you could perform an image of your image receptor and then perform using some post-processing tools, analyze the histogram of your images, the variation, perform some ROIs, some regions of interest, compare the mean values and the standard deviation of the pixel values, and analyze the exposure index of your detector. And over the time, you could compare if the quality of your detector is being affected. If you have the lucky to be involved in a large team with a medical physicist and also could perform some examinations with quality control phantoms and analyze the imagings together in order to detect the different errors that you have in your images. So it's important to analyze also all the monitors that are using to check the image quality. So what are the approaches to optimization? We have different levels on this. If you're going to start by the basics, It's important to establish protocols, establish quality control or quality assessment tests for the different types of systems. For the CR and the DR, we could perform different tests. Then go through an intermediate process which involve the radiographers, radiologists, the medical physicists, discuss all these values that I tried to present to you here in a brief summary, and try to get a level of quality that you accept. If you have the opportunity to go on the continuous cycle of optimization, you could perform an advanced practice in optimization, perform some images with anthropomorphic phantoms, and then having some team discussions in objective and subjective image analysis, compare all the exposure parameters that are presented here, and use all the guidance that you have in your department. So in conclusion, I try to present here a review of exposure parameters and their impact on examination dose and image quality on radiography. I think it's important to optimize all the steps that you have on the workflow, check all the, using like a checklist, and different levels of optimization could be promoted in order to maintain the optimization as a continuous cycle. So thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Joanna, for that very thorough and interesting overview. We have a few questions for you, but we'll leave those until the Q&A session. And I'd now like to introduce Jenia Vasileva, who's going to outline how the report addresses the issue of interventional and other fluoroscopic procedures. Over to you, Jenia.
Thank you, David. Hope you can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Indeed.
Yes, that's fine.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to briefly present the chapter 3 of the report, that is interventional and other fluoroscopic procedures. This is the content. It has 8 sections. And I'll go briefly through the main components of the optimization process related to fluoroscopy. We know that since its discovery, significant advancements have been made in fluoroscopy equipment and also the techniques, which has impacted their clinical use, starting from the direct fluoroscopy screens in the past, dark adaptation, high radiation exposure related. Going through the invention of the image intensifier coupled to TV camera, initially analog, then digital, and the various recording options, of course, analog at the beginning and then digital, introducing automatic control, brightness control, that is currently automatic dose rate control. And of course, the big revolution in the current century with the solid state detectors, flat panel detectors, as Joanna already introduced, using either indirect conversion or direct conversion that are also available in fluoroscopy. And of course, this digital gives them a lot of opportunities for processing. Fluoroscopy as an interactive imaging modality was initially used for diagnostic procedures used by radiologists, but currently more and more fluoroscopy-guided interventional procedures are used for navigation of instruments to perform various surgical, minimally invasive interventional procedures. And as we know from the latest ANSCIA report, the number of conventional fluoroscopy has been reduced. And of course, their contribution to the collective dose, but 6-fold increase in frequency and 8-fold increase in collective dose happen in interventional radiology because they are less invasive, less risky for patients, safe, cost, and also this allows for a number of procedures in fact, all medical specialties to be performed. And also what is we can say is the increase of complexity of the procedures. These procedures performed by various professional groups, that is a big challenge for radiation protection especially, but also for optimization specifically, and used in a variety of settings, not in only dedicated radiology departments, but also in operating theaters, in hybrid rooms, in fact, in really various settings in hospitals and clinics. In addition to the main staff, to the operator, there are other staff in the room because of the specificity of interventional procedures that makes increased importance of radiation protection training. Optimization in these imaging modalities is a really challenging task, having at least these 4 components: selection of equipment, configuration and exposure setting, optimization, comprehensive quality assurance program, not just quality control, but also patient dose monitoring and other aspects, and of course, appropriate use of the equipment, feature, and settings. Let's go quickly through these main components. We know that there are different configuration of fluoroscopy equipment, and the optimal selection of this configuration depends on the clinical task. So, of course, conventional combined fluoroscopy radiography systems, C-arm, normally mobile, used in operating theaters and in many various settings. And of course, angiography systems, either single plane or biplane. This appropriate selection is a responsibility of the clinical core team, and this should be done related to the clinical use, and this is an imperative part of the dose management and quality assurance program. Fluoroscopy system components needs to be also properly selected and of course very well known from this technical specification of the equipment. Regardless of the configuration, these main components are always present, so we know that of course the level of complexity may vary, and of course the price of the system. That's why we need to properly select these components. But what is typical, it's high power generator, high head capacity X-ray tubes, 2 or 3 focal spots used depending on the resolution needed, high filtration, also very specific here with heavy filtration, image receptor, also varying in size, and they should be selected depending on the clinical task performed with this system, and of course, automatic dose rate control system. Pulse fluoroscopy is nowadays used only, continuous is not anymore used in fluoroscopy systems with different pulse rates, with various pulse width, and also, of course, pulse rate selection depends on the imaging task. If we need rapidly moving organs, we might select higher pulse rate, and we can accept lower pulse rate for systems that do not require the temporal resolution. So that's why, because we know that the exposure rate reduces with reducing the pulse rate. We need to always properly select the appropriate modes, but it's typical for the fluoroscopy system to have acquisition digital radiography in addition to the fluoroscopy, and this also varies depending on the type of the system, and also what is typical here is the much higher tube current leading to much higher exposure for the patient. So those savings features are available in the modern system. Of course, last image hold should be always useful whenever possible instead of acquisition. Last series hold is also available in some of these systems, and very useful store and replay of the recent fluoroscopic imaging sequence, allowing for saving unnecessary acquisition. Beam spectrum filtration is very typical especially in angio systems, but also in other fluoroscopy system, aiming, of course, to reduce dose to the skin as in all radiation X-ray systems, but also to shape the spectrum to match the absorption age of contrast media. In addition, which filters are used in angiography, especially again, to compensate for the lower object attenuation and improve image quality. Proper positioning of this wedge filter is very important. Collimation is an integral part of any X-ray system, and it's equally important here. They are, of course, automatic collimation system that restrict the beam to the image receptor, and this is a part of the quality control checks to ensure that it's always in place, but also collimators dual shape, circular or rectangular, to modify field. And as we know, and Joanna also highlighted this, the use of collimation limits dose to the patient, reduce scatter, that improves contrast, and reduce staff dose, because here in fluoroscopy cases have staff present in the room. Positioning, modern system allow for automatic positioning without radiation, and virtual collimators that also are dose saving techniques, because they allow for proper collimation without radiation exposure. Anti-scatter grid, as in radiography here, it's also the use of anti-scatter grid for children and thin objects is not recommended, so it's the anti-scatter grid is preferably to be removable, especially in complex system. The core part of the fluoroscopy system is the automatic dose rate control system, working differently in the old systems, just controlling automatically tube current and tube potential, depending on the operator selected mode. Normally systems have low dose, standard, high dose, high contrast mode, but in the modern system, there are more parameters automatically controlled, including filtration, focal spot size, and even pulse width. And we need to know our system and how it works, of course, properly configure it, as I will highlight this in a few minutes. Magnification in the image intensifier systems. This works as just electronic focusing on separate part of the screen. And normally radiation exposure was inversely proportional to the area of the screen focused. But in the modern flat panel systems, this logic is more complicated, and we need to know how the system works because it's vendor dependent, and it should be always checked at commissioning. It's not, again, there is a reduction of air kerma rate with the size of the area, but it's not the same logic as it's in image intensifier systems. Additional modes are available, especially in angiography systems, for digital subtraction, for rod mapping, and beam computed tomography, rotational angiography, and their use should be properly selected depending on the clinical use of the system. And of course, image processing algorithms, most of them are automatic for spatial noise reduction, temporal noise reduction, or edge enhancement or contrast enhancement, but some of them are operator controlled, so operator can also have interaction with these algorithms. It's important to properly select image display. It's important for visual perception of the images and has indirect impact on the patient and consequently on the staff dose, because the operator is normally moving closer to the window, to the monitor, and it's a small window, small monitor, sorry. So large monitors are preferably in the modern angiography practice, especially. So, and this, of course, indirectly reduce patient and staff dose. So going to the system configuration, they are vendor pre-configured examinations in the modern system. That is a set of exposure technique factors, all of these that I just reviewed quickly, and set of image processing parameters. But these vendor pre-configured examination and patient-specific factors set can be adjusted to the local practice and user preferences. And this is normally happening during the commissioning by the vendor representative. It's normally application specialist or a local super user. Not every user can have access to this, in collaboration with the hospital medical physicist and experienced clinical staff who need to define the local clinical preferences. Then configuration and optimization of exposure setting, depending on the clinical task. This is an example for the paper of Jones in medical physics, in which you see an example from nephrostomy exam presets with 3 modes for fluoroscopy and for acquisition. Also we can define, the user can define which to be the default one, like the bolded here. Protocol configuration and optimization requires clear understanding of the system features, functions, program architecture, as well as the clinical requirements and operator preferences. That's why this is extremely important, and that the education and training of all participating in the process is crucial. Then equipment commissioning comes performed by medical physicists, but normally in collaboration with the equipment vendor representative and clinical staff to confirm the equipment function, to check acceptable values have been set for the default acquisition programs, to establish baseline values of equipment performance in terms of image quality and those parameters using standard phantoms and test objects, and representing on range of modes. And here, just as an example, important part is testing and adjustment of automatic dose rate control settings, setting baseline values of the incident air kerma rate at the image receptor in all various modes, because this system characterization will be then used for the routine quality control, and also for the setting baseline values of the patient entrance surface air kerma. And of course, we need to comply with the local regulatory limits if they exist for entrance surface air kerma. Quality control program needs to be placed to evaluate performance of all exposure modes relating to selection of options that are optimal for specific imaging tasks. And you see here the table from the report recommending the main elements for testing the X-ray source assembly, collimation and radiation field alignment, automatic setting, the exposure control settings, integrated radiation dose displays, image quality, Combeam CT mode, if it's available, also need to be tested. We have guidelines for this, so it's not not the focus of this report to deal with the content of quality control tests. What is important that there are some developments in the fluoroscopy area in this field, because testing fluoroscopy system, especially in automatic mode, is very challenging. We know this, and now user quality control mode for especially interventional procedures is now regulated by the IEC and NEMA that provides more comprehensive physical tests to be performed in routine quality control. And of course, development of new methods and more realistic test objects that are task-based model observers evaluation of system performance. Dose monitoring is extremely important in fluoroscopy, both for managing stochastic but also deterministic effects that might happen. And we have well regulated that dose index display need to be in place with at least the reference air kerma rate and cumulated reference air kerma and air kerma area product rate and cumulated values of this quantity. And exporting this cumulated values at the end of procedure in a proper digital format to the procedure report. It's also well standardized by the DICOM radiation dose structured report and currently patient radiation dose structured report. We can use this data for benchmarking our practice to the diagnostic reference levels. And as we all know that there are many challenges in setting DRLs for fluoroscopy guided procedures, especially because they are first therapeutic, not diagnostic, varying by severity, complexity, and site. So most cases not well standardized. And there are by wide distributions of doses for a given procedures. ICRP publication 135 recommends, although it's therapeutic, keeping the term DRL for FGI procedures, using setting DRLs in Kermeria product, in reference air Kerma. Of course, fluoroscopy time and number of images, radiographic images could be also used as additional dose indices. And having as many as possible patients, especially for complex procedures. Of course, automatic dose monitoring systems, when available, help in this data collection. And also aim to determine DRLs based on procedure complexity or utilize different concepts available, such as advisory data sets. For tissue reactions, it's extremely important to also monitor patient doses and set alert levels. In the past, we measured peak skin dose distribution with different physical means. Nowadays, post-procedure and even real-time color-coded skin dose maps are available that are calculated based on measurable dose quantities using an algorithm that is more and less standardized. So we need to monitor throughout the complex fluoroscopy guided procedure these indices, especially peak skin dose if available, or cumulated incidence air Kerma, that is a better representative, best representative to skin dose, or if the previous two are not available, DAP, and set notification levels. Here you can see the recommended values for first notification and subsequent notification. And normally it's recommended to have either automatic alerts or notification by a designated staff member, for example, a nurse will be monitoring these values. After the procedure, especially after a complex procedure, it's also very important to monitor those, to record these values in the patient and clinical documentation, and to follow up patients if these triggers are exceeded. These are the latest trigger values recommended and used in the ongoing IEA project international study, aiming to understand better which triggers work and how frequently tissue reactions happen. Of course, even the ideal system, if not properly used, will not provide optimal results. So it's important to set optimal procedure performance procedures. So again, before the procedure, we need to review the staff need to review patient medical and radiation history, need to establish standard policy for assessing pregnancy, having standard checklist, always have to identify patient and high risk, guidance on methods for reducing risk, guidance for performing procedures during pregnancy, and written form to educate patient and obtain consent. During the procedure, the core here is the well-trained team on methods for dose reduction for patient and staff. We can find many of these dose reduction approaches in the previous ICRP publication that Colin mentioned, and also in many training materials also provided by the IEA. So during the procedure, it's important for the optimization of the procedure to have clearly predefined responsibilities of all team members. The main operator of course, having the primary responsibility, but also all others in the room should have clearly defined roles and defined and positions and knowledge how to protect themselves and what is their contribution to the procedure success. Patient cooperation is important, and timeout pre-procedure is also very important. And after the procedure, as mentioned, producing radiation dose report and following patient for high dose procedures. Follow-up approximately happens 30 days post-procedure, but the patient need to receive an instruction and discharge information for monitoring the areas of the skin for a potential tissue reaction. You can find more on this on the IA website, especially related to SAFRAT, safety in radiological procedures. There are other training resources for interventional procedures, e-learnings, and I would strongly recommend those who are involved in interventional and fluoroscopy procedures to view these tutorials, practical tutorials with 4 to 8 minutes each to learn effects on various factors on patient and staff dose, and of course temporal posters to remind staff on approaches. And to summarize this chapter of the report of ICRP report, the complexity of the dose management quality assurance program and the level of performance and optimization depend on the arrangements that are in place for each of the aspects. And they depend on the professional skills and collaboration, methodology and technology, organizational processes and documentation. And there are many elements that needs to be in place. And I tried to briefly review all of them. And finishing with the last but very important point, the training in radiological protection and optimization is crucial along with the other elements of the quality assurance program. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Jenia. That was another fabulous and thorough review of the content of the screen. Could you start sharing your screen? Thanks. Great. Thank you very much. As I said, a fabulous review of the content of the document. The document itself obviously goes on to consider CT, and what we've decided to do is to discuss CT in two parts. So the first is going to be presented by Mika, and his talk is entitled New Technologies for Optimization in MDCT, EECT, and Photon Counting CT. So very current, and over to you.
Thank you, David, for this nice introduction. Can you see my screen and hear my voice well?
Indeed, I can.
Great. So I'm trying to first reflect on the new technologies for optimization in this fast developing field of computed tomography. And then Irene will continue on clinical aspects. So I will try to cover mostly the general aspects of CT optimization in multi-slice or multi-detector CT, but also cover some of the technicalities of dual energy and very exciting new area of photon counting CT. So first of all, it's worthwhile to look at what we are actually balancing in optimization in computed tomography. It's important to acknowledge the factors that influence on radiation dose and image quality balance. So we should take into account all the relevant physical factors in CT imaging and how these factors actually have the relationship to the radiation dose directly on or indirectly. For example, MAS, the current and time product, has a direct proportional relationship to the radiation dose. If we double the mass, we also double the CTDI vol or SSDE for the patient. But for example, the kilovoltage has much more steeper relationship to the dose. And also we have various parameters like reconstruction kernels, which don't affect directly to the dose, but they have indirect effects. And that's very important because that happens through the image quality, which we typically describe by contrast, noise, and resolution, and how it interplays in the CT images. This chart that I'm showing is a bit simplified, but it shows the main characteristics between dose and image quality. But it actually lacks the main character here, which is obviously the patient. So we should take into account how the individual patient physiology and anatomy affects to our imaging parameters, how they should affect to those, and how we actually make, for example, patient centering to the isocenter of the CT scanner. It has great meaning to the dose distribution, noise, even contrast of the images. What is the scan length minimized by the indication anatomically? How many scan series we actually need? All those have impact on optimization and how the radiation exposure formulates. And I'd like to address that without adequate diagnostic image quality, all these efforts to decrease or optimize traditionally the dose are meaningless. So we should take into account the image quality and put that into focus. If we look at the overall radiation exposures in radiology in European countries and also globally, we see that the current development has pushed CT in the forefront of that exposure. It's clearly the dominant part of these numbers. For example, in Finland, we see that 70% of the overall radiation exposure in radiology to patients, it's already coming from computed tomography. And that in turn motivates this optimization subject in CT heavily. So there has been great developments in optimization tools in CT technology, in also clinical applications, and there's been acknowledged even industry-wide objective to reach lower levels of radiation dose. Here is the example of how these optimization technical tools affect if we have 10 millisieverts of traditional abdominal pelvic CT scan. Already, if we take into use the automatic exposure control, which means tube current modulation, it has the clinical benefit of ensuring more consistent image quality and noise in the images, but we also get a reduction of 25% roughly into the overall radiation exposure. Of course, that's highly variable number. We can go on with a spectral optimization with the kilovoltage selection or automatic selection of that, even using additional filtration of for example, non-contrast chest images using tin filtration. So we're trying to interplay with the main physical characteristics that we have for CT and try to optimize that for the patient. Also, we can go on with more elaborate tools like helical collimation in Z-axis, and especially what is the important topic is how we can improve the image quality, reduce artifacts, and so on, with iterative reconstruction techniques already been there for a decade or 2 decades, but also recently with deep learning reconstructions, which should ensure even more reduced noise in the images, preferably also artifacts are reduced. So indirectly, we can also reduce the radiation dose because we can do more with less with these techniques. And of course, I'd like to address already here that we have a great potential from photon counting CT, which can have many separate benefits, which I'm going to explain a bit later. So we have various steps along the way, and it also is reflected on the report by describing what kind of tools we have in the basic level, what kind of steps we can take forward in the intermediate level, and what we should expect in the advanced level, and I'm going to reflect on those. If we just look at the automatic exposure control, the tube current modulation, it aims to have a consistent image quality throughout the scanned range in Z direction. So instead of just pushing the constant dose or constant milliamps in each section of the patient, of course, the patient is highly different in attenuation in different parts of the body. So if we let the automatic tool choose the proper dosage for each layer of the patient so that it takes into account the attenuation, we can have more consistent image quality, especially regarding the noise in the images. And not only that, but when we have more consistent and constant image quality, we can also make informed decisions on what is actually adequate image quality. And we can estimate that. We know that the noise in the images roughly follows the Poisson statistics. Noise is inversely proportional to the square root of the dose. So we know what happens if we, say, reduce the dose 30%, which is already a clear dose reduction. But the question is, we should be here multi-professional. This means that we should have feedback on the image quality diagnostically from radiologists, and by physicists and radiographers, we can do the changes in the scan protocol accordingly. The same applies also in the tube voltage, which has a very steep effect on the radiation exposure because of the dose is dependent on the voltage and the power of 2.5 roughly in CT. So also here, we can utilize different kind of tools. We can do manual optimization of kilovoltage with the iodine enhanced scans, or we can use automatic tube voltage selection tool, which basically takes the topogram or scout image, the planning radiograph of the CT scanner, transfers that into the attenuation net profile of the patient. And based on that, the automatic tool computes various kV specific MA tube current modulation profiles. And that result in the specified CNR or image quality described by contrast and noise. So we have various options of how to scan the patient with sufficient image quality, and this tool just then decides to take the most dose efficient alternative of those. So this helps by reducing many overlapping protocols when you really can automate the kilovoltage decisions. So based on these optimization tools, we have certain dose information to the patient, which we should monitor and collect. And when we collect and monitor the patient doses by CT-DI-vol and DLP, which are the main dose parameters traditionally in technical level in CT, we should also use the diagnostic reference levels, or DRLs. Here is an example from Finland. This in our report is described to be used in the intermediate level, and it also slides a bit to the advanced level, because what we are dealing with in diagnostic reference levels is one of the basic tools of optimization, but that tool can become more elaborate if we extend the traditional anatomical diagnostic reference levels, like here for head or brain CT is 55 milligrays in CT-DI-vol. We extend that to take into account the clinical indications. So in the blue here in the table are indication-based reference levels, which we have nationally established in Finland. For example, in high-resolution lung CT, it's 5 milligrays, as compared to the anatomical DRL in chest is 9. So we should be indication specific when we go further along the path in optimization and we reach higher levels in that. We also should elaborate our dose units that we use, our dose parameters. Traditionally in CT, we have been using modality-specific dose units of CT-diavol, our DLP, to describe the exposure, and we still follow those in dose monitoring systems and displays of the scanners. But we should move forward and use more patient-relevant descriptors of radiation dose, like size-specific dose estimates, which take more patient size into account, towards the anthropomorphic human-like models, and finally patient-specific doses. How we do that is to use the dose management or radiation exposure monitoring systems, even utilize the Monte Carlo deep learning methods to estimate this patient-specific dose. And by that, we can reach more effective optimization as a continual target, utilize exposure monitoring and dose registries for wider scale optimization strategies, and radiation safety research in the long-term targets. So here are some examples how we did that in HUS Finland. We have, for example, here head CT doses overall from our more than 30 scanners. Overall, last year we have more than 200,000 CT exams. The median dose was, in effective dose, was 3.2 millisieverts here. So it's good to have a big picture clear. And this is possible with the dose management or radiation exposure systems. We should utilize those. And out of those systems, we can also go higher and more developed parameters for optimization, like SSDE and effective dose. Overall, our target for optimization is move towards the advanced level, and it also means to moving from technical to clinical focus, also in image quality. And obviously, it involves multi-professional collaboration with radiologists and physicists and radiographers. So this is the key issue to crossing that bridge. Some examples how we use, for example, artificial intelligence as a new methods for optimization. We can go directly to the clinical images of the patients and use artificial intelligence or deep learning to estimate, for example, the noise in these images in white and gray matter of the brain. So it directly helps to us to go to the new level of quality measurements. Also, new technologies in CT enable deep learning based reconstructions here in the right. So as compared to the traditional one on the left, you can see clearly how the image appearance is improved. Especially you can see that in noise levels in these images. Going to dual energy CT, there are various options how you could optimize those, and it depends partially on what is your specific model, how is it built for dual energy scanning. Does it has a dual source based model with, for example, additional tin filter? Is it KV switching, dual layer detector, or split beam model? And just to make this short, for example, if you have a dual source system, basically the optimization, how it improves the image quality is by spectral separation. So it has more focus on that side. If it's a dual layer detector system, maybe the optimization strategy for dual energy CT is more on spectral availability, because it makes basically all scans potential dual energy scans, and so forth. Obviously here, photon counting CT is a strong candidate for improvements. And I couldn't go on to finish this presentation without mentioning photon counting CT is very important newcomer. And if we think how it improves image quality, I would say that there are especially 4 strong points. Smaller detector pixels, which increase the resolution of the images, possibility to eliminate electronic noise by energy levels of these detectors, using intrinsic spectral availability of data and possibly multiple KH materials in the future, and also equal contribution of lower energy quanta from iodine, so we can optimize iodine-based enhanced imaging. And you can clearly see the benefits of resolution in this image example of multi-slice CT and photon counting CT. So I'd like to just end this with a short optimization cookbook, how we can summarize the main dose management methods. It all begins with the referral guidelines, adequate information, verified indications to avoid unnecessary exams on the usual levels, as is reflected in our report. For example, the first 3, avoiding extra scan series, minimizing scan length, centering of the patient, is possible with any kind of CT scanner. And then I have already mentioned these other tools. The one of the basic things is to utilize the underlying technology, which is promoting optimization. As a backbone of optimization is regular service and quality assurance program, as also described by Zhenya, monitoring of patient dose and clinical image quality, where we can also utilize radiation exposure monitoring system and adequate user training. So some things are simple. If you want to do proper consistent image quality, unify also your protocol naming and coding. Maybe you get a support in the advanced level from clinical decision support and radiation exposure monitoring systems. So this is more or less what I wanted to say. Key thing is we need indications based in specific optimization in CT due to the high radiation levels. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mika. That was very interesting. I specifically really like the idea of the optimization cookbook. That's fab. Oh, sorry. I'd like now to move on to the second part of our CT talk, which is from Irena, who's going to talk about MDCT in clinical practice. Over to you.
I'm going to link to Mika's presentation and talk about the clinical practice of a multi-detector CT. So we are going a bit back to the basics. So for each clinical indication that we have in CT, we are going to have different needs in terms of diagnostic image quality level. And it's going also to depend on the patient characteristics, like the morphometry, the tissue composition, distribution, and the disease stage. The CT protocols, as Mika said, in CT are developed around the clinical indication and also diagnostic needs. And sometimes they are adapted to supports of patients. So for example, in your CT, you may have a range of thorax CT protocols, depending on the clinical indication, like for ultra low dose thorax CT, lesion follow-up, high resolution CT for trauma. And you may also have different pediatric protocols, depending on the size of the parts of the body of the children or their age. Each CT protocol is going to be based on a selection of values and different options. And in CT, we have a wide range, as Mika has mentioned. So we have many acquisition and reconstruction parameters, and all of them are intertwined, and they have an effect in dose and also image quality. We need to pay attention to the different reconstruction methods that we have available in the market, and also that there are wide differences between vendors and even between models of the same vendor in terms of the options that we have, and also the impact that the different parameters we select are going to have in image quality and dose. So CT protocol optimization is going to be challenging, and it requires dedicated time and good knowledge about how your system operates. There still exists a wide variability between countries and continents for similar clinical indications in terms of CT doses. You can find that in different surveys like the one I'm showing here. And this is related to the availability of CT technology and how advanced it is in each area. Also, differences in personnel training on dose optimization, patient workflow management, and the absence of an adequate dose management in your center. Also in surveys, we observed that even for similar CT models, there can be a wide range of doses between similar or equivalent clinical indications. So the message is that it's not only the car that you have, but also your knowledge about how it works and how you drive it. Luckily, there exists an increased awareness about the need for optimization, and those levels continually reduce globally. And this is mainly due to the vendor and software improvements, like the ones that Mika was talking about. Especially iterative and AI-based reconstruction have lowered a lot of doses, and also educational programs, because it's very important that we train our personnel properly. Protocol optimization can result in significant dose reductions, but it depends on an adequate selection of the scanning parameters, and also understanding how they interplay and how they affect your dose and also your image quality. So we have a lot of homework to do in terms of optimization of protection worldwide. And the existing resources, characteristics, and challenges that you have in each center, country, and region need to be taken into account into the optimization process. Where can you start? So always consider your particular circumstances in your service region or country. For instance, what CT systems you have available, how much personnel, how much time do you have? If time and resources are limited, your priority can be to first set up the protocols for examinations that are performed frequently and the ones that are for urgent indications. And lean as much as you can in the CT vendor initial support, especially when they are setting your system for protocol optimization. If you have available personnel and resources, you can be more ambitious. And then for the optimized use of MDCT in clinical practice, considering both dose and image quality, you require a close cooperation among a core team, as we have already mentioned. So ideally, you need to involve the radiologists, the clinicians, also the medical physicists, the radiographers, and potentially IT. That's the core team, and you can also count on the vendor applications specialist if it's needed. In the document, you can find different tables where we make certain recommendations about what to do depending on the resources you have. And as Colin has mentioned, we have followed a philosophy of 3 levels. So we have a basic level, that's level C, where you have limited resources, and what are some of the steps that you can take for the optimization of your clinical protocols. Then we go for an intermediate level, and finally for an advanced level. And for the sake of time, I cannot go in depth, but in the document, you have a lot of tips that you can follow depending on your resources. If you don't have any CT protocol set up, hopefully not, but if that's the case, there are also resources in different websites like the AAPM, where you can find reasonable CT protocols for some CT indications and the major manufacturers. But keep in mind what CT model and vendor you are using to see if you can try to translate some of these protocols into your practice. We have different stakeholders in terms of optimization. We have as physicists that we need to measure objective technical measurements, and normally we use phantoms like this. And we also have radiologists or clinicians, and they require different levels of image quality depending on the clinical indication. We can use anthropomorphic phantoms to try to mimic the patient to some extent. And we also need to keep in mind what's coming our way. So far, we only have radiologists or clinicians looking at the images, but AI is going to play a role in diagnosis in the coming years. So we also need to keep an eye on that. And a very relevant participant in the optimization process is also the radiographer or technician, because they really need to position the patient and acquire the images. So their training and participation in the optimization process is crucial. So the CT protocols need to be developed with input of all of these professionals, as I said, and then all the options of image quality level, the exposure factors, everything needs to be agreed by consensus of everyone involved. And sometimes you can use anthropomorphic phantoms to help in these tasks, and potentially also cadaver studies if that is allowed in your center. Keep in mind that what works to optimize your protocol for one clinical indication may not work for another. For example, if you increase the rotation time for certain step points, you can increase your spatial resolution, and that's good with protocols without contrast, like inner ear imaging. But if you use contrast injection, then your timing for the inflow of the contrast and the outflow is crucial. So it may not be a good idea to tamper with the rotation time to increase your spatial resolution. Patient positioning is very important in optimization. So again, the training of the radiographers in this regard is very important because it's going to affect your automatic exposure control. And you can use anthropomorphic phantoms in this case to help in this process of optimization, and putting markers there to help to decide what is the starting and end position depending on your clinical task. And even if you don't have access to anthropomorphic phantoms, because sometimes they are expensive, you can also figure ways to try to train your personnel in this case. For instance, using even dolls if you don't have access to anything else. We need to keep in mind that CT technology, especially image reconstruction, has become more tailored by design to human data. So deep learning reconstruction is mainly trained with patient images, so anthropomorphic phantoms need to play a bigger role in our QA and optimization process. Again, in the document, you can find different tables where we recommend some indications about what acquisition parameters to use for certain specific types of patients, like in this case for pediatric imaging. And also some tips about how to develop and also maintain your CT protocols. For instance, your scan protocols need to be reviewed periodically, and also their development needs to be continuous. And measurements need to be done to keep track of potential changes in image quality and also dose. The new protocols that you implement need to be compared to the old ones and changes made if required. And be careful if you copy protocols from one system to another, because the translation usually is not one-on-one. And beware also of potential changes in your CT protocols after a software upgrade, because that can affect your reconstruction parameters. So keep an eye on that too. So to finalize, successful MDCT in clinical practice is complex, and the image quality required depends on your clinical task. The required image quality for a specific clinical task is going to depend on your patient and also your CT system, both from the technical and operational point of view. The acquisition and reconstruction parameters are intertwined, and a lot of knowledge is needed of how your particular system performs if you want to perform successful optimization. And it's a team effort. So please enroll all your colleagues and keep involved the radiologists, medical physicists, and the radiographers in all the optimization process. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Irene. We got there in the end. That was a very interesting talk. Could you stop sharing your screen now?
Yes.
And thank you for that second review of CT. The next presentation on the program was from Kimberly, who unfortunately can't be with us today. So Colin is going to quickly review some considerations for pediatric patients. Okay, Colin.
So I'll try to cover very quickly some of the main points that Kimberly wanted to get across. So we need to be particularly concerned about children because they are more radiosensitive than adults. This shows a plot of radiation-induced cancer against age, but generally the cells, more dividing cells in their organs, which are more sensitive to radiation damage. Moreover, they've got longer lifetime ahead of them, and so more time to manifest any radiation effects. So keeping doses low is especially important. And children also come in a wide range of sizes, so selecting exposure factors more difficult because of the range in size and the extra care needed. So patient age is a poor predictor of body thickness these days because weights vary quite a lot. So weight is generally preferable for assessing exposure requirements. And the boundary definitions based on individuals' scans, say CT scans, if you have a slightly longer CT scan, because the organs and tissues are much closer together, you're more likely to expose other tissues. So a particular care is needed in collimation and restriction of CT length. But it's not just the difference in size. Children aren't small adults in terms of their sort of general approach to life. So children's understanding and responses to different situations vary as well as their behavior. So staff carrying out pediatric exposures must understand and have the ability of patients to cooperate as well as the influence of the exposure. And in addition, children's physiology and diseases differ from those of adults. So cancers are typically large sarcomas, which is unlike adults. So staff must know what alternative examinations are available. They must know what different clinical indications to look for, and know of the techniques not involving ionizing radiations that are generally available locally that might be used instead to avoid ionizing radiation exposure. So there are particular technical factors that you can use. A grid is usually unnecessary for infants and children under the age of 4 years because there's not the same amount of scatter. The addition of copper filtration can remove lower energy photons, which will give higher doses to the superficial tissues. But the general selection of pulse radiography on the lowest possible settings when possible, use dose reduction methods when available, including virtual collimation, and develop pediatric specific protocols for common conditions, and do this for all modalities. So patient size specific protocols are particularly important for CT because of the high dose levels, and Irena showed you the different tube potentials that we recommended. So protocol optimization requires an understanding of the clinical indications, the patient sizes, and the ability of the patients to cooperate. So it brings together all these different factors. So when planning a CT scan, have you considered the alternative imaging options such as ultrasound and MRI? And remember to scan only the area of the body indicated. Don't overscan and focus on collimation. So protocol optimization, there are a growing number of resources on the open web, and Kimberly stressed particularly the image gently protocols for digital radiography in back to basics. There's also fluoroscopy, CT, and interventional protocols for pediatric exposures. So there are important differences from adult digital optimization. And so you need a better understanding by the whole team. And the whole team includes not only the radiological professionals, it's much wider than that. So the radiological professionals must have specific education and training in optimization techniques for imaging infants and children. But the referring clinicians, the patients, the carers, and the children themselves must be given sufficient understanding of the process. And this might be through use of information leaflets, there's WebAge, but this additional knowledge allows them to be involved in the decisions that are made for imaging. So this is an important difference from adult optimization. The shared decision-making applies from the time when the imaging is being considered through performance of the examination, the diagnosis, and decisions about management of the patient. And this includes all the stakeholders in the justification, pediatric care, and communication. So wherever possible, have trained personnel and adapt the protocols for the unique circumstances for each patient. So some of the key messages: the core team must have adequate education and training in optimization of imaging for infants and children. Use weight as an exposure indicator, a proxy for the patient thickness rather than age. It's a much better way to develop digital radiology protocols. Use dose reduction methods when practical with fluoroscopy. These include virtual collimation, removal of the grid, pulse fluoroscopy on the lowest possible setting, additional copper filtration, and last image hold. And develop patient-specific protocols for common conditions for all modalities. And with that, hopefully that covers some of the main points that Kimberly was planning to cover in her presentation.
Thank you for running us through that, Colin. Thanks very much. In the interest of time, I think we'll just move on to our last, but by no means least presentation of this morning. It's a recording from John Damalakis about pregnant patients, the optimization in pregnancy. Can you play that, Charlotte?
Hello, everyone. It is quite a pleasure for me to present this topic on imaging pregnant patients. Utilization rates of X-ray imaging in pregnant patients have increased due to the rapid evolution of medical technology and its enhanced accessibility. And this is shown here in this paper published in Radiology, and here in this article published in the American Journal of Radiology. Trauma is the most common condition occurring in pregnant patients, and this is often leads to imaging. However, pregnant patients also have several medical conditions that occur more frequently than in women of similar age who are not pregnant. Pulmonary embolism is the most common cause of death in pregnant women. Other serious conditions include cerebrovascular disease, cardiac disease, and bleeding, all of which use complex imaging procedures. Before any X-ray examination, expected benefits should be weighed against potential risks, and if benefits outweigh risks, the examination is justified. In the case of pregnancy, we balance benefits and risks to the mother and conceptus. In many cases, the mother may benefit from the exposure, but there is no direct benefit for the exposed conceptus. However, a healthy mother means a healthy newborn. If the conceptus does not lie within the primary bin and the dose is low, then the risk will be minimal. Conceptus dose from routine extra-abdominal radiodiagnostic studies is less than 1 milligray. Normally, it would be unnecessary to perform in-depth conceptus dose evaluation for such studies because the dose is very small and would not be any reason to alter patient management. This slide shows conceptus doses from 3 extra-abdominal exposures. The situation is different if the conceptus is exposed primarily to radiation. This slide shows doses from abdominal examinations. For example, conceptus dose from CT ranges from about 10 milligray to about 20, 25 milligray, depending on many parameters. And I'd like to stress here that multiple CT examinations and fluoroscopic procedures may be involved, such as in cases of serious traumatic injuries of pregnant patients, resulting in conceptus doses greater than 50 milligray. However, this may be justified to save the mother's life. Justification of exposure during pregnancy is not an easy process. Referring physicians have to take into consideration the size and position of the conceptus, and biological effects of radiation to decide if a lung CT, for example, is justified or not. Another example is the upper abdomen CT examination performed during the first post-conception weeks. This may result in a conceptus dose below 1 milligray. However, the dose from the same type of examination may be higher than 10 milligray at the third trimester. An example of suspected pulmonary embolism illustrates some of the issues and decisions to be made regarding the choice of imaging technique for pregnant patients. Guidelines suggest avoidance of radiation by using ultrasound of the lower extremity veins for evaluation of deep venous thrombosis. If uncertainty remains, then either lung scintigraphy or CT angiography are used. Conceptus dose from both examinations, lung scintigraphy and CT angiography, is very low. CTPA delivers a higher dose to the breast and lung of the pregnant patient than lung perfusion scintigraphy, but it provides more clinical information and the procedure is readily available at any time. For these reasons and the continued dose-lowering CT technology, CTPA is considered by many the test of choice for the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. Of note, however, is that maternal radiogenic cancer risks from both CTPA and lung perfusion scintigraphy are very low. The decision as to whether to proceed with CTPA or scintigraphy to rule out suspected pulmonary embolism in pregnant patients often depends on equipment availability and referring physician preferences. In this work, the authors found that in pregnant patients, CTPA rarely indicates pulmonary embolism and more often shows alternative diagnosis. This histogram shows the CTPA findings in the patients without pulmonary embolism, including alternative diagnosis and completely normal CT examinations. Pregnant patients may also be exposed accidentally during the first weeks of gestation. A group of females likely to be exposed accidentally are women with irregular cycles. In fact, approximately 1% of women are exposed to abdominopelvic radiation in the first trimester before they realize they are pregnant. According to ICRP and national guidelines, conceptus doses lower than 10 milligray are low doses. Installation-specific measurements and calculations of fetal doses may be necessary if fetal doses are suspected of exceeding 10 milligray. Conceptus doses below 100 milligray should not be considered a reason for terminating a pregnancy. Above 100 milligray, termination of abortion, termination of pregnancy might be considered depending on several parameters, including the stage of pregnancy. For example, during the first trimester, the embryo is more sensitive, radiosensitive than in the second or third trimester. How can we estimate conceptus dose from imaging examinations? Dose assessment is possible by using physical fandoms and dose meters, Monte Carlo simulations, methods published in the literature, and software packages. I cannot provide details within the time available for this presentation. However, information about these methods is included in the upcoming ICRP publication. Determination of pregnancy before irradiation is crucial, and ICRP publication 84 states that investigation of the reproductive status of a female of childbearing age prior to X-ray imaging is needed, and it is prudent to consider as pregnant any young woman presenting herself for an X-ray examination at a time when a menstrual period is overdue or missed, unless there is information that precludes a pregnancy. To minimize the frequency of unintended exposures, posters should be displayed in the patient's waiting room and other areas of the X-ray department, warning patients who could be pregnant of the risk to the conceptus from an X-ray exposure. A picture or illustration of pregnancy clarifies the message. It's very useful. When a pregnant patient undergoes an X-ray examination, the exposure should be optimized, and this procedural optimization is a complex process because many parameters affect patient dose. For example, exposure parameters such as parameters, filtration, collimation, scanning length, reconstruction algorithms, dose reduction tools, and many other parameters should be considered to optimize the exam. This slide shows how to control conceptus dose from computed tomography examinations. Practical ways to control dose from CT examinations. Avoid primary irradiation of the conceptus if at all possible. This is very, very important. CT scanning in the pregnant patient, especially when outside of the abdomen and pelvis, provides low amounts of internal scatter to the fetus and can be life-saving to both mother and fetus. Establish low-dose protocols. Pay attention to minimizing scan length. This is very important. And it doesn't affect image quality. Avoid the use of pitch values less than 1. Limit the number of phases. Use dose reduction tool. Use iterative or deep learning image reconstruction. Align pregnant patients and the Gantry ISO center accurately. And practical ways to control conceptus dose during fluoroscopically guided procedures. These procedures should be optimized, and alternative non-ionizing imaging modalities such as sonography or MRI should be considered, of course, during the justification process. These boxes are included in the upcoming publication. So, for example, for fluoroscopically guided procedures, it is very important to collimate the beam carefully to keep the exposure time as short as possible. Use as high a tube potential as possible. Avoid overuse of the magnification mode. Keep the X-ray tube as far away from the patient as possible and the detector close to the patient. Use low dose rate pulse fluoroscopy. Use last series holds when available. Keep the dose from digital subtraction and geography to a minimum. Consider using ultrasound guidance for catheter insertion and choose a route that reduces conceptus dose. Determine the optimal status of the maternal bladder in relation to the type of rejections needed for the procedure. Finally, a few words about shielding. The use of patient shielding to reduce conceptus dose is no longer recommended for any type of diagnostic X-ray procedure. Thank you for your attention.
I'm not quite sure how to say thank you. Oh, John is with us. John, thank you very much for putting in that recorded presentation.
Thank you, and apologies for not being able to join earlier, but I'm here in Berlin for another meeting. So I joined, David, I joined now for questions and comments.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Charlotte, do we ask all of our speakers to turn their video on now? Is that correct?
Yep, if you can, that would be great. And yeah.
Okay, so we've got a Q&A session. We've had an awful lot of questions, so I've been collecting them, and I'm going to fire some off. And if anyone has any, if I miss any out that people would like to answer, please do cut in. But to start right at the beginning, there's a couple of what you might call philosophical questions about the entire approach that came during Colin's presentation and then later. I think they're kind of summed up about roles, responsibilities, and who's going to do it. So to give you an example, For example, for CT, who will define the optimal thickness for an abdo-pelvis scan? For example, should it be 1.25, 0.3, or 5 millimeters? That's a typical question, but what they're really saying is who's got the responsibility to push the stakeholders to work together? And the question in particular that I think would be interesting is someone specifically asked, how should one get meaningful input from radiologists in the optimization process? As physicists, we find it not too difficult to get radiographers involved, but finding radiologists has been extremely difficult. And I realize these are really complex questions. So I thought rather than starting off with the easy ones, we'd start off with the most difficult one. And perhaps, Colin, could I ask you, because you introduced the whole idea or you introduced to the webinar the concepts behind TG108's approach.
You know, I suppose it depends on the individual group, but I mean, at the start, I think getting the different radiologists and the radiographers to agree on the level of image quality that is required for the different clinical scans is sort of key. I mean, in the past, I've sometimes had difficulties deciding on getting radiologists to agree what was the appropriate noise level, because some reckon that they can manage with, in a CT scan, say, with a much lower one, and it's quite difficult for us as physicists sometimes to judge, to make that clinical judgment. But I think forcing the radiologists in at the start, and then perhaps they could sort of move back a bit as they have their busy workloads. But Mika may have more direct experience in recent times on this.
Yes, may I continue? It has been a gradual process with many steps, and it actually began with a DRL launch in our environment. So we were discussing what kind of protocols gave the larger doses and also causes for that. And when we were considering that, we also had to do self-assessment of clinical image quality. And that phase was actually the key to stimulate the more active involvement of radiologists to come aboard, because it was a clear task to do to evaluate clinical image quality for certain of our protocols, and also when commissioning new CT scanners or radiography post-processing systems, the situation was same. So it has been a gradual process, slowly involving more and more organ-specific radiologists to become active members of optimization teams. And it has also demanded, for example, medical physicists to have specific responsibilities on modalities. So if you have a physicist who has invested more time, for example, in DR techniques, so they might have more involvement with radiologists in that specific area. But more or less, it began with the DRLs, then with self-assessment of clinical image quality. And from there on, the team approach was more or less getting stronger year by year. But it's a long process.
So does that mean when we say, Mika, that the task is both, the task is reader and task dependent? The imaging quest is, does that mean that we're getting rid of the reader dependency? People are agreeing on what an image is, or what a diagnostic image is? Yes.
Yes, I would say that. It's
and would you say, Joanna, that was the case in radiography?
Yeah, that's true. I think that one step that is also important is to involve all the team to define protocols. There are some questions here from the audience asking from tips and tricks to start this, how to involve the team. not only radiologists, but also radiographers. So these discussions of image quality criteria for diagnostic, it's a hard part, as Micah presented here, but also the selection of the protocol and get used to have some meeting to discuss. I have the experience to have some small meetings about a small topic to present what is happen in this image modality, what we could change on this area, and then have small meetings that were planned all over the month, and you increase the results in terms of dose reduction and image quality, and try to motivate the team. We all know that when you have a team, no one goes at the same time for optimization process. It's hard, but you're going to get more involvement of your team. You start with a small number of professionals that are interested, and you get more interest and feedback if you maintain this as a process, in my opinion.
Okay, and as a follow-up, which is about the same kind of thing, I think it's really aimed at Mika and Joanna. Someone said that they have difficulty in convincing radiographers to use task-specific DRLs, either, i.e. indications rather than anatomical ones. And even if they show them the figures, they really find it difficult to get them to adopt. Do you have any tips, Mika and perhaps Joanna, about how to persuade people to use task-based DRLs?
Yeah, if I can, I could share my experience. For example, if you start for one body region, for example, for head, that is more easy because patients don't vary so much on head, and you focus a little bit more on clinical tasks. You could try to give some examples of the most used procedures, for example, for stroke and for hydrocephalus and other tasks that are used to appear in your department. Then after they get more involved and know the DRLs based on this clinical indication, you could go for a more difficult body region, for example, as chest or abdominal, that you have large variation on patient size, not only the clinical task that is mandatory. Baby steps, start with a more easy and go for a more difficult one, in my opinion.
Mika, anything to add? You specifically mentioned it in your talk in terms of CT.
Yes, we actually have a dual drivers for that. We had a national regulator who established, based on the very large survey of patient doses, they established both anatomical and indication-specific DRLs for CT imaging. So that was more or less driving, as a regular point of view, this task-specific approach. Another part was what I showed in my cookbook, was quite a simple thing to start, was the consistent naming and grouping of protocols, so that we really could compare the same protocols between different scanners. And when we got our own radiation exposure monitoring system, we also got capability of looking at those consistently named protocols and classes, what kind of doses they gave. And that also meant that we could have our own indication specific approach. So our own information system and regulator. One point I would like to make still is that the task specific image quality evaluation is not only subjective. We had quite a long discussions on who is responsible of setting the reference levels for image quality, so to say, for the protocols. Mm-hmm. So we had to give a clear responsibility for the chief radiologist in certain body region to really have the consensus view produced. It cannot be a dozen radiologists doing what they want. It has to be harmonized.
Thank you. I have a couple of hands up, and I'm afraid I'm not sure who put their hand up first, so I'll just look at my screen from the left. Genia, your hand is up.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, I wanted to comment on the previous question. In fact, yeah, from both my past life in my country, my home country, Bulgaria, but also from the IEA. The most challenging part is when medical physicists are either not available or external to the facility. I think in this case, it's very difficult because in order to really being involved in optimization, there should be a trust built in between the members of the team. That means there are many countries and many facilities around the world without medical physicists being clinically involved, and this is a challenge. Here, I think we need more involvement of also regulators to make this happen, because we recently made a survey, even in Europe, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, TC Europe region, when the regulation does not require medical physicists to be involved in diagnostic radiology. How then medical physicists can be involved in the clinical team? But even when they are available, there is a need to build trust, to establish good relationship, and usually starting with those radiologists or those radiographers who are interested in optimization, in improving practice, is a good start. And related to fluoroscopy, that was my topic today, my experience shows that it's always easier to start explaining how you can reduce staff dose, and then easily, of course, you can add to these that reducing these factors contribute to staff dose reduction, but they contribute to patient dose reduction. So it's step approach, because initially, when you are a newest medical physicist in this clinical environment, physicians do not have trust in what you are saying, and that's the first, I think, point, very important point. We call this creating champions among physicians who can be involved initially in the core team, and then, of course, going to all others.
That's a great point. Thank you for that. And just to keep the discussion rolling, John, you have your hand up too.
Yeah, thank you, David. My comment is related to clinical DRLs and how to establish clinical DRLs. The way I see it, or the question is, do we have clinical protocols? Do we have clinical CT acquisition protocols? If we have, then the establishment of clinical DRLs is, in my opinion, easier. So my experience, my experience shows that in many computed tomography units and suites, the protocols are more of them are anatomical rather than clinical. So there are, let's say, 10 or 12 anatomical acquisition protocols and 5 or 6 clinical indications-based protocols. And this is a problem, of course. So first, we need to develop a strategy and inform people how to establish clinical CT acquisition protocols, and then I think the rest will be easy. People will understand the needs to establish clinical data.
Okay, thank you. And Napapong.
All right, thank you. I will speak on behalf of the international perspective of radiographer. I think when we want to implement the indication-based protocol, we need the education and training to start with, because this is something new. Continuing professional development should be there. Actually, radiographers play important role in optimization, and we already adopt the DRL concept into our, especially in this part of the world, in Asia. We basically it's between radiographers and radiologists, because like Colin Martin mentioned earlier, that setting for, I don't say that we do not need the clinically qualified medical physicists, but it's so difficult to have medical physicists on site. The best we can get is access to their service. So I think education and training for radiographer in terms of DRL and optimization is very important. And as international organization, we put this as our priority to disseminate this information to our member societies so that we can really implement the optimization as the team approach as the role of radiographer.
Just thank you, Napapong. All very interesting stuff, isn't it? Trying to keep a theme going here. I think I can't. I think I'm going to go into perhaps what you might call some definitive or some technical questions. But before we do that, I think this is a question for everyone to ask. It is a technical question in a way. It's primarily, I think, aimed at Genia and Joanna, and it has already been answered in the Q&A, but I think it's probably worth a chat. Napapong, could you put your hand down, or else I'll just come and ask you to say something again. Thanks. Andreas says that in his personal opinion, electronic collimation in post-processing should not be avoided. It must be forbidden, right? Not avoided, but forbidden. If used, the raw image has to be archived. To obtain beautiful images, cropping can exclude exposed areas of the body and important collateral findings. The aesthetics of the images isn't our primary task. It's just a statement from Andrea Magistrale, but I wondered if you had any comment on that. And I think it's really talking to Genia and Joanna, but of course anybody else, please feel free to come in.
Yeah, I have commented about this topic because if you not properly use the collimation, you use the electronic collimation, of course there is a bad procedure because you are increasing the examination, those values. However, if you have performed proper collimation and you want to help the observer in terms of the image quality, and you want to decrease the differences of the grays around the image, electronic collimation could also be good. So it's important to get adequate training for the correct collimation, and then only use electronic collimation in that conditions, not to don't use the electronic instead of the classic one. That is not a good way of proceeding.
Genia, any comment? You mentioned it in your talk.
I suppose under electronic collimation, it's meant cropping images after the procedure. Of course, it's a bad practice that should be not practiced, should be avoided, definitely. Yeah, but disabling this, I don't have opinion on this.
Okay, forbidding it.
I think this is the standard training protocol for radiographers worldwide already in terms of digital imaging acquisition. So I don't think this is the what do I say? Since this is a standard training way that we train the radiographers, so radiographers who are clinically qualified radiographers, they should know this already. So this is just what Joanna has said already.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm just going to move into a completely different topic to make sure that we involve everybody. A question for John, but it's just a general interesting question. Is there a current consensus about a radiation dose value used to decide on the termination of pregnancy?
Yes, there is a consensus. So, as I mentioned during the presentation, national and international guidelines and recommendations recommend abortion above 100 milligrams. So this is the dose, not limits, but dose level above which abortion might be considered, especially if the exposure took place during the first trimester of gestation. So to the best of my knowledge, there is a consensus, and I don't know, I'm not aware of any other approach or different dose level.
Anybody else have any comment? It's out with my expertise. The questioner said that AAPM have spoken about removing their limit of 100 milligray.
I'm not aware of that. So what do they propose? WAPM proposes
I do not know.
what?
I don't know. As I say, it's out with my expertise. So anyway, thank you for the
David,
answer.
if I can just add here, I think it's a recommendation. I mean, increased risk above 100 millisievert, but wishes of the women should be always taken into account.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah.
The reason of why, I mean, this 100 milligray is not a magic number. It is because the threshold for deterministic effects is 100 milligray. So below 100 milligray, the stochastic effects should be taken into consideration. Above 100 milligray, we should take into account both deterministic and stochastic effects. The situation is getting complex, and that's why ICRT recommends that level of 100 milligray to be the level above which abortion might be considered.
Might be considered, yes, yes. A question, perhaps a more less contentious question aimed directly at Genia. Newer fluoroscopy systems are hybrid systems, so involving fluoro and CBCT, and they add much more complexity to optimization of practices. Would you like to comment?
That's true. I think that what else I can, yes, of course. First, it requires all these modes to be properly tested. It requires very close cooperation between the medical physicists, clinical people, and vendors, because before you start optimizing, we need to know the system and how it functions. And then, of course, going into the protocol optimization. Unfortunately, in the last 10 years, I don't have clinical experience in specific systems, so maybe someone from the audience can be in a better position, although I'm following the developments, but practical advice on optimization, maybe someone else can comment on this.
I guess we can read what the audience say, but I don't think we can hear them. So
yeah,
we'll probably
if I could share a little bit of experience using CBCT,
sure.
if you have it on the fluoroscopy systems, you could try to change the presets from the CBCT. You have some presets with different number of frames per each acquisition type. So if you could try to use the ones that have less frames, as you are on fluoroscopy mode, it could be you could use it in different modes across the procedure. What happens in the big centers, if you're having an emergency situation, for example, for neuroradiology, you use the standard, and sometimes you could decrease this number of frames per image. For example, it could be useful to decrease the total examination dose. So it's important, as Jenny has said before, to test the system, to analyze how in each moment that you are performing CBCT instead of classic images.
Good, indeed. So as you say, just basic standard steps that you would normally take. So is that actually increased complexity, or is it just doing more of the same then, Joanna?
Yeah, I think that if you are, it depends on the levels, as were presented by Dr. Colling at the beginning. If you are starting now the optimization process, you need to select the most basic ones to go. If you are already involved and your team already know, and everyone gets more knowledge and get more training on this, you could go for a large examples as advanced practice and optimization. But I think it also depends of the realities. If you are talking about a small center that only provides radiology, it will be more focused on that field. If you are talking about a large center that you have all the image modalities, more complex as these ones that have fluoroscopy equipment with CBCT for interventional, for example, or others with a large number of CT examinations, it comes from the basics to the great involvement of the team and all the image modalities. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of specifics and then a question from the audience that I've just picked up, and then a final question, and we'll go to the panel discussion, I think. There are too many questions for us to answer, but perhaps, Jenny, you could just give us a couple of words on what you mean by pre-procedure timeout.
Yes, thank you. I could not answer this in the chat because it disappeared in my box. But timeout is a practiced approach in surgery, in many other procedures, in radiotherapy, for example, strongly recommended. It's just a short pause prior to the procedure, before we start, going through a simple checklist, for example, just to ensure that this is the correct patient, this is the correct procedure, that we have everything in place before we start. This is the timeout. That's a very, very important safety measure.
I would agree with you completely. A question at the, just to and I think I'm going to aim this one at Colin, and I'll paraphrase. In some places where health services are disorganized and doctors often recommend CT scans without following proper protocols, what are the patient's options? Can they refuse a procedure? Also, well, and so on. So it's really about, I think, in terms of the publication, it's how do you encourage the establishment of what you might call pre-optimization, level D, as you call it in the document.
Well, I think it's two sort of separate questions.
Okay.
If you're not getting the clinical information through to the radiology department, then I think it ought to be up to the radiology department to refuse. But I know in some of the missions that we've done for Genia, we've been quite alarmed by the number of CT procedures, for instance, where there were very little information provided on the clinical indication at all. And so what I think should have been done was to keep going back to the referrer. But in fact, for practicalities, or for immediate practicalities, what was often done was that patients were given CT scans with multiple phases that they didn't need, building up lots of extra data which wasn't required, blowing more CT tubes than they ought to have been blowing, and so gradually building up a problem for the long term, in that they had to keep buying extra data storage facilities and all sorts of things. So I think you really have to try and jump on top of these bad practices right at the start. And I think it's up to the radiology department to or put down their foot.
Sometimes that's hard to do. Then, I mean, in some places, someone doesn't request a scan; they order a scan, don't they? So it's not as easy as the radiology department putting down their foot.
I know.
Anyway, perhaps that itself is probably a question that we can have a very long discussion about, and even think that there may be scope for a new publication on justification. But the final question, and it's a bit cheeky, but and I'm just going to leave it open for a couple of minutes because I'd like to give Kwan the opportunity to lead his discussion. The question is, does development in the direction of more patient-specific dose data really provide relevant information on the radiation effects for the patient, given the fact that individual sensitivity of a patient for ionizing radiation is not known? And this is a hornet's nest, so I just being a bit cheeky, but just see what, anybody want to comment on that? Perhaps I can ask you, Mika, because you suggested that we, in your talk, that we do consider patient individualization.
Yes, I think it's a question of going from technical to clinical, and I think on that journey, our image is sharpening in different aspects. We see it in image quality evaluations, in indication-specific optimization strategies. But for radiation dose estimation, I think that's one of the long-term issues. We cannot certainly estimate the individual risk with the current information. It's all based on some cohorts or populations, some models based on organ doses. But the key message, I think, is that our image is sharpening. And while we have more wide-scale information from radiation exposure monitoring system, one of the long-term targets is radiation safety research. It takes time, but I think along with that big data that we are accumulating, we will get some relevant results regarding more and more accurate prediction or estimation of radiation risks. At least to certain groups of patients, maybe in the future, it will be more sharpening even to close to individual level. It would be hard to imagine that, but it's a future, maybe.
Indeed. So, and I think at that, I'd like to thank all of our speakers this morning for the excellent presentations that they gave. I'd like to thank the audience for all of the excellent questions, which we haven't really been able to answer all of, but we will attempt to answer them later. And I forgot to say, just to remind you all, that a recording of this webinar will be available in about a week's time on the ICRP website. And now I'd like to hand over to Kwan, who's going to introduce and lead a panel discussion on global optimization strategies, which I think is quite relevant to what we've been talking about today. Thank you, Kwan.
Thank you, David. I'd like to invite the panelists to come on board. My name is Kwan Ng. I'm from Malaysia. I'm the chair of the Asia Safe. In the panel, we have Boris, representing ESR, Eurosafe, and Napapong Ponapang, representing ISRRT, and Monica Bernardo, representing Latin Safe. Unfortunately, Don Frush, representing Image Gently, couldn't join us last minute. So let's begin. First, we'd like to look at the global perspective regarding optimization. I'd like to listen to different organizations from different regions. Each one will present 2-3 minutes on the comment on this TG108 part 2. And then later on, we have some topics for the panel discussion, and hopefully we can cover as much ground as possible within the next 30 minutes. Since they put up my slides, I'll begin first. The Asia Safe comment on this part 2. Okay? Next. A general comment from the Asia Safe represents the Asian Oceanian Society of Radiology. The general comment will be this particular report provides practical, systematic methods for optimizing radiation doses in our daily practice from machine parameter settings, we heard a lot earlier, imaging workflow, protocol development, collaboration between, collaboration between multidisciplinary professionals, and so on, to a higher degree of harmonization of these optimization processes across multi-specialty clinical teams and equipment types within our healthcare system. It's pretty a long statement. Basically, what the general comment is that we need the multidisciplinary professionals, the high degree of harmonization, and that is important. Next, we look at some specific comments. We have a lot of input, in particular from the Hong Kong College of Radiologists. So I'd like to bring out the highlight from them. They commented that the publication provides practical, systematic methods for optimizing radiation doses in our daily practice. And then the radiographers need to review examination requests carefully to prevent unnecessary duplication and consult radiologists if there is a possibility that the examination is not clinically appropriate. So here they highlight the importance of the radiographers' role in that the practice, and also development of referral guidelines may be helpful. And in particular for the pediatric age group, every request should be vetted by the radiologist, or better still by the pediatric radiologist. Next. Also highlight that the radiographers should be proactive and familiar with the most current dose reduction techniques and must operate equipment optimally in accordance with safety and image quality policies and procedures. That also for later, I think Dr. Napapong will comment more about the important role of the training for radiographers. And they highlight very important to achieve optimization. And then they continue to comment on some special considerations on pediatric procedures, such as involve play specialists in calming children and keep them still during imaging studies. And this is something very interesting and perhaps new to many of us. They have very strong pediatric radiologists in the Hong Kong hospitals, and in particular for MR, they have this play specialist psychologists to help to condition the little kids to that MR scanning. So they have a play technique. So that has been very successful. So that this could be also used for those who are undergoing CT scan, for example, how they can remain still in the room themselves. Feed and sleep approach for young infants, another interesting technique. The feeding program in appropriate timing, and also protocoling by pediatric radiology should be done. So there's important role by the pediatric radiologists, and split dose technique to reduce number of phases acquired. So these are some of the highlighted on pediatric procedures. Next. And also a particular point is related to the variable body size of children. Optimal positioning of patient in the center of CT gantry is crucial to reduce radiation dose. So this is a part by the radiographers, positioning and body parts not to be imaged, or instruments such as infusion pumps, other monitoring devices should be removed from the field of view to avoid raising the radiation dose unnecessarily. Sometimes it's difficult to do that, right? You see some of these devices being connected unavoidable, and this can hugely affect the radiation exposure in children with small body size. Okay, there is the highlight from the Hong Kong College. And next slide, next slide, please. Thank in general. Beside the Hong Kong College Radiologists, the Vietnam Society of Radiology Nuclear Medicine also contribute a little bit for that, and also Dr. Wing Chan from Chinese Taipei as well. Okay, that's all from the Asia Safe. Thank you, Sean. Can we move on to Boris?
Thank you, Kwang. I don't have slides, so I will speak just spontaneously. So basically, what you have just presented, I agree, and we can endorse it on behalf of Eurosafe. As you all probably know, we are especially dedicated to use of imaging referral guidelines that we developed together with American College of Radiology in a way of this clinical decision support that is embedded in workflow of patient care. We have iGuide system with 2,300 clinical scenarios that is being used in many European countries. And I just briefly have to say, although it is indirectly connected with this, that we are now conducting a large European project in 7 countries about justification of CT referrals. It's being performed in Finland, Denmark, Belgium, Estonia, Hungary, Slovenia, and Greece, where we are looking about appropriateness of CT referrals. The results will be finalized by September, but I can say that we have observed quite a low number of pediatric CT examinations and very low number of inappropriate pediatric CT examinations, which is good, which shows that this is improving. But regarding optimization, there are many items here. I have to say I'm sorry that Don Frasch is not present. As you know, International Society of Radiology has Quality and Safety Alliance that is run by him and Guy Frija, our past chair and founder of Eurosafe Imaging. They did produce and they have sent to ICRP some comments on behalf of International Society of Radiology, which actually contain also Eurosafe and Image Gently observations. I mean, first, we are happy based on, I was recently with Don on a meeting of ICR, happy that this shielding is included in pediatric population, actually lack of need of shielding, which is something that both Image Gently and Eurosafe were proposing recently, and we produced some papers on gonadal shielding. Now I have to say that those observations on behalf of ISR QSA that Eurosafe is endorsing also and Image Gently. I mean, basically this document is good. Overall, we can say that there is some lack of clear definition of digital radiology in the very beginning. The report is quite long. There are some repetitions, of course, which is probably impossible to avoid, and this will not be read by a large public, probably. Also, we think that maybe there should be more clear practical guidance for optimization policy implementation, and some aspects are weak as regards to local and clinical DRLs. Eurosafe has published recently a good paper. John Damilakis was the main author on national and local DRLs. We also think that ICRP could consider publications by European, that Eurosafe produced. We sent a list of 17 recent references there, among those on local and clinical DRLs. And also, so probably the strategy of implementation might be a little more clear. There are some suggestions to make a better distinction of CT issues, plain film, and fluoroscopic guided interventions, although they are quite comprehensive. And there is a need to update radiation protection regulations in each country. I have to say, on behalf of Eurosafe, that Europe is very diverse. We will probably have discussion a little later, so it's very hard to give a general picture for all European countries. It's rather different if you compare Western to Eastern Europe. In pediatric population, maybe more issues should be on the patient size, as it was mentioned in Asian comments. And basically, maybe we could add an explanation of audit of patient dose, especially who does the audit, whether these are national or local regulatory authorities versus audit by the hospital staff. And then some specific comments on some lexicon issues were provided. But I can speak more later in the discussion. If okay,
thank you, Boris. Next, I'd invite Dr. Napapong, ISRRT.
I get some slides, so if I can share it quickly. All right, hope you can see. So this is pretty much the work from our previous director of professional practice, Stuart Wickley. Basically, the ISRT welcomed the valuable of this report as a good resource, and with the emphasis on a team approach to provide optimization, we believe this is the very important. And we did provide several comments and suggestions for the changes and update, especially the terminology of the profession. We are called radiographer or radiological technologists. This is a standard terminology, not technicians. And part of the document, we gave comment on the recognition of roles in certain different countries are differ. For example, radiographer performed image interpretation in UK and Australia. So this is part of our practice too. And we do recognize the workforce and resource limitation. Again, we do also value the importance of education and training, especially for radiographers in terms of optimization, since practice may vary from one place to another and education and training may vary too. So this is the job of ISRT to reach out to our 94 country members to run the workshops in response to the implementation of this report. And we found some challenges in meeting the optimization performance level, as the practice may vary from one place to another, but at least we should have the minimum standard when we provide a service to the patient as the global standard. And this document can help us a lot in terms of the implementation. And also we mentioned about the challenges in applying radiomics and artificial intelligence in determining image quality. We know that when we optimize, we need to take a look at image quality, both in terms of physical image quality and also clinical image quality too. And radiographers, we do need the training for our professions in this subject too. And again, education and training of clinical staff are very important. So that's pretty much from our perspective from the ISRT. Thank you.
Thank you, Napapong. Next, we will call on Monica Bernardo on Latin Safe.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this. I think there is a video that we can. Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this important workshop. My name is Monica Oliveira Bernardo. I'm a member of Latin Safe and Brazilian College of Radiology Committee. One of the missions of the Latin Safe is to promote the radiological protection of patients in Latin America following bone correction. And our main project to optimization is the dose reference level implementation to adult and pediatric CTA. So we engaged a multi-professional team. We did data collection from equipment, patient dose, clinical education, and DMI. We did analysis, and we are training optimization on-site and online workshop. We create test groups and engage with local sites. So this document is very important and possible and necessary to be implemented. But we have some challenges on optimization in the current scenario. Suboptimal skills in those parameters, as well as AI instruments, those monitoring control, heterogeneous technology scanners, no clinic indications and patient size information. We need to do this culture, but we need scrutinize adult and pediatric CTA. So it's an opportunity on education and training, those reflect level implementation, revision of protocols, update scanners, improve justification and optimization. Thank you very much.
Right. We have a couple of questions for our panel to discuss. In fact, we're also answering some of the questions posed earlier. The first one I'd like to ask you is regarding how easy do you think that the framework proposed in these two TG108 publications could be implemented in your respective regions? Napapong, you want to start first?
Can you repeat the question? I just come back.
Okay.
Sorry.
How easy do you think that the framework proposed by these two publications could be implemented in your region?
I think it depends on the local practice because it depends on how much human resources you have. I think education and training for radiographers in well-established places, we can easily implement this, but in less resource places, I think we still need to have the input for them in terms of the education and training on this subject. And I think globally we have to gear on that way. Otherwise, it's going to be a challenge to implement the whole document. This is my opinion.
Thank you. How about Monica in Latin America?
Yes, it's not easy, but I think it's possible. We are engaging local societies, physicists, medical physicists, radiologists, and technologists to help us. And it's very heterogeneous. It's a continental country, but I think the DRL implementation and engaging all this team to do this. And we are thinking that it's going to improve. And this document is wonderful. I think we will have a lot of help to do this.
Thank you. How about Boris?
Yeah, thank you, Kwang. So as I told you, Europe is really quite diverse, so it will be different in different countries. Overall, it won't be too easy because optimization requires really high level of the awareness of the need for optimization, as well as sufficient level of education and training of all professionals involved. We think that in many EU member states, this will be achievable. In some, especially Eastern European countries, it will be harder, and non-EU members, but certainly these publications like this one can make the whole process easier.
Great, thank you. The next question is interesting. Do you have multi-professional teams and collaborative optimization culture in your region? Multi-professional teams and collaborative optimization culture. How well
are you asking me? Are you asking me or yeah? So basically, if we look at most European countries, these multi-professional teams exist. In my country, which is very small, Croatia, for instance, medical physicists have been involved in diagnostic and interventional radiology maybe for last 10 years, much later than in radiotherapy, but mainly in university hospitals. At the beginning, radiologists and radiographers were not sure what exactly was the role of medical physicists, but today, in most of these hospitals, the optimization issues are approached multi-professionally, and benefits of medical physicists are very well recognized, and there were really considerable improvements in last 10 years. I would say that in most Western European countries, this is the true now, the effect now.
Yeah, I think in Europe is leading in that. How about situation in Latin America and Asia? So Monica and Napapong?
Yes, it's depends on the region. For instance, in Brazil, in the south of Brazil, medical physicists, they are, for the legislation, they are obliged to have this professionals in the hospital. So, but in the other states in Brazil, it's not an obligation. So most of them are external. But we are trying to engage, as I said, the societies, the Brazilian Society of Medical Physicists and the radiologists, and also in Latin America. We are engaging. I would like to thank Marta Edith, that is our president in Latin SAFE. She is trying to get involved with all the regional, local societies of all the countries to do this work. So now it's not, that's not happened, but we are trying to, and I think the societies are interested in this also.
Okay, thank you. And Napapong also can comment about Asia Safe as well.
Yeah, I think in Asia, we are quite good in terms of collaboration among the professional societies. And even we still need to catch up with the clinical medical physics and diagnostic radiology, but it's getting there. So basically the radiographers and the radiologists in the hospital, we work as a team already. And with the support from the physicists would give us a very good opportunity to implement this task on optimization. But again, we still have some less resources places that they don't even have the proper training of radiographers. So this is our job as international organization to take a look, and then we will go to help them running the courses. So again, in Asia, I think we are getting there.
Okay, good, very encouraging. There's a top question on dose management system. Do you think that the dose management systems are likely to allow optimization in real time in the future through comparison with, for example, doses from previous examination?
Let me say the experience in Thailand, we just established the CT dose index registry. It helped quite a lot because normally you don't know what kind of dose you exposed to your patient unless you monitor it or you audit it. And then when we implement this scheme, we found that the hospital that has the dose quite high, they contact back. This is the multidisciplinary approach among physicists, radiologists, and radiographers. We come as a team. So we went to assist them in terms of optimization. So I think this dose management system will definitely have role for in optimization.
Okay.
It helps a lot, and possibility to audit and to engage the radiographers and the medical physicists and the radiologists. It really helps a lot. Okay. And we are doing in Latin America workshops and analyzing data. Thank you.
So I think there are many challenges in DMS implementation is still quite complex. There is problem of mapping of examination codes. Also, DMS don't take into account image quality, and there is no proactive dose management. We had session in the recent ECR about those management systems and basically AI support of those management systems. And I would say that optimization of image quality using information from past examinations might be one of the fields where AI could be used, because AI algorithms could analyze data from past exams and patients' characteristics to optimize the amount of radiation during imaging exams. And we hope that those AI systems will be developed eventually.
Okay, thank you. Boris, you have led to the last question about is on AI really. So in the context of digital imaging optimization, how important do you think AI will become in the next couple of years in our profession in optimization?
Yeah, so thank you. So for instance, I hope that it will be important. So in a lecture that I told you, it was shown, for instance, that even in Germany, which is probably the most developed country, there are no standard namings for examination protocols. Every department has its own naming conventions. Maybe in the future, this logical observation identifiers names and codes will be used. but names might even be different from the same examinations on different machines. And it is very work intensive to make the DMS. DMS basically needs mapping of procedure names. Also, if we speak about central protocol management, where role of AI might be very important, this is also needed for order entry and for clinical decision support. So we think that AI might be used relatively fast if this develops to do automatic mapping of exam codes, automatic recognition of the examination already performed, and optimized choice of examinations protocol. Like, for instance, this optimized version of ESRI guide clinical decision support that I just spoke about. Also, for instance, analysis of patient history, like clinical, radiological, to optimize for choice of examination. And then, as I said, optimization of image quality using information from past examinations.
Okay, thank you. Monica and then Papung, briefly. Monica?
It's important, as Dr. Boris said, but unfortunately, I think the people need to know how to use it, because sometimes we have new scanners, and even the radiologists and the technologists need to improve. So I think education is important on this to use adequately.
Yes, for us as radiographer, AI has come already in terms of the auto positioning. Like in CT, you know that if you don't, radiographers don't position the patient right at the center of the couch, or the couch is not right at the center of the gantry, the dose will not optimize by the ATCM. But and also the protocoling. So what we do as profession is the education and training. In terms of curriculum for radiographer, we are gradually implement the education and training topics on the AI that related to professional practice of radiographers, so that we as professional radiographers and also the future radiographers as the trainee, they will understand the concept of AI and how we can utilize the AI for our professional practice. And again, AI will not replace the profession. AI will assist us, because the radiographers or technologists, we are the bridge between the technology and the patient. So at the end, you still need qualified radiographers to authorize the scan, and education and training for radiographers in this subject is very important.
Okay, thank you very much, Boris, Monica, and Papung. Now I hand over the session to David, who will conclude this workshop.
Thank you very much, Kwan, and thank you, Boris, Monica, and Napapong, for a really interesting discussion. I found it, you know, very interesting to hear what was going on everywhere and what your perspectives were on the document as well. So I think that's the end. It's 3 o'clock. Thanks to everyone for keeping to time. Thanks again to the speakers. Thanks to the panelists, and most of all, thanks to the audience for sticking with us and providing such a rich diversity of questions that shows how engaged you all were. I'm not sure what happens now, Charlotte. Do you just end it for everybody, or can the panelists and speakers stay online for a minute or two?
We should be able to stay.
Unfortunately, no, we can't. If we can send around a Zoom meeting if you guys want to.
No, it's okay. I was just hoping we could have a quick "how did it go, guys?" But that's absolutely fine. If we can't stay on, we can't stay on. And just once again, thanks to everybody, and we'll see you all again. And look forward to receiving everyone's comments on the document. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.